Hey, and welcome back to Wildflowers and Moonlight. I'm Alex, and today we're going back to the tarot table. But instead of talking about how to read tarot, we're going to look at one particular part of the deck that tends to get a lot of attention. The Major Arcana. You've got the Fool, the Magician, the Lovers, Death, the Devil, the Tower, the World. Even if you've never touched a tarot deck in your life, there's a decent chance you've seen at least a few of these cards somewhere. Especially Death. Oh, the poor Death card. We've really done some damage to that card's reputation. But the Major Arcana is so much more interesting than a collection of dramatic cards with mysterious names. Because when you put these 22 cards together, something begins to emerge. A story. One that includes beginnings and choices, love and loss, confidence and uncertainty, control and surrender, things falling apart, things coming back together, and eventually beginning again. In other words, it's a story about us. So grab your coffee, tea, tarot deck, or whatever you've brought with you today. Come sit with me. We're going to follow the Fool's journey. When you're first learning tarot, the Major Arcana can feel like the important cards, and I understand why. They have names and they have numbers, and the artwork is usually dramatic, and pulling something called the Tower feels significantly more important than pulling, say, the Four of Pentacles. There's also this tendency to think the Major Arcana is a big event, and the Minor Arcana is a little event. And that's not necessarily how I think about them. I tend to think of the difference more in terms of theme and scale. The Minor Arcana often deals with experiences of everyday life, our emotions, thoughts, relationships, resources, conflicts, projects, decisions, the stuff that's happening around us. And the Major Arcana tends to zoom out. Instead of, what happened today? It might ask, what am I learning from this chapter of my life? And that's a very different question. A Major Arcana card can sometimes point towards a larger developmental theme, an archetype, a transition, a lesson we're encountering. That doesn't mean something enormous is guaranteed to happen every time you pull one. If you pull the Tower on Tuesday morning, please don't spend the rest of the day staring suspiciously at the ceiling. It might be asking you to look beyond the immediate situation, and that's where the Major Arcana becomes very interesting. So there's 22 Major Arcana cards in a traditional tarot deck. They're numbered from 0 through 21. And the story traditionally begins with card 0, the Fool. The Fool represents beginnings, potential, curiosity, stepping into something without exactly knowing where it will lead. And if that doesn't perfectly describe the beginning of basically every meaningful journey we've ever taken, then I don't know what does. You don't begin with all the answers. You begin because something makes you want to take the first step. And from there, the Fool encounters the other archetypes of the Major Arcana. This progression is often called the Fool's journey. Now, historically, tarot wasn't originally created with one official Fool's journey narrative packaged alongside it. The Fool's journey is a later interpretive framework that became popular as a way of understanding the Major Arcana. And I think it's a really useful one, not because everyone has a life that follows the cards perfectly in order. It absolutely does not. Life would be significantly easier if we got a notification saying, "Congratulations, you have completed the Hermit. Please proceed to the Wheel of Fortune." So instead, we revisit these themes over and over and over again, because that's what humans do. So rather than memorizing 22 definitions today, I'm going to look at the Major Arcana as a few larger chapters, because Once you begin to understand the story, the individual cards become much easier to remember. So, Chapter 1, Becoming Someone. The journey begins with the Fool. We're standing at the edge of something new, and we don't know what's going to happen. We just know we're going. And then we meet the magician, and the magician says, you have tools, you have abilities, you have some capacity to influence what happens next. That's a really important shift. The Fool begins with possibility, and then the magician asks, what are you going to do with it? And then comes the High Priestess. Now we turn inward. What do you know beneath the surface? What are you noticing? What aren't you ready to act on yet? And already, look at what's happening. Action, intuition, outer world, inner world. We're encountering different ways of moving through life. Then we meet the Empress. Nurturing, creation, growth, and abundance. The things we cultivate. And the Emperor brings structure, boundaries, authority, and order. The container that allows something to take shape. Neither one is automatically better. Sometimes we need to grow, and sometimes we need structure around the growth. Then comes the Hierophant. Tradition, institution, teachers, systems. The beliefs and structures we're introduced to by the world around us. And eventually we reach the Lovers, which, despite what every romantic movie would like you to believe, isn't simply, congratulations, soulmate. The Lovers can absolutely involve relationships, but it also deals deeply with choice, values, and alignment. Who am I becoming? What matters to me? What am I choosing? And then the Chariot. Now we move. We've developed some sense of self and encountered systems and relationships and choices. So the Chariot asks, where are you going? The first part of the Major Arcana feels almost like building a self. Learning the world, learning yourself, and deciding how you want to move through it. But then things get harder because, of course they do. We're all human. Chapter 2, Meeting Yourself. Depending on the tarot tradition or deck you're using, Strength and Justice can appear as cards 8 and 11 in different orders. That's one of those little tarot details that can confuse you the first time you switch decks and think, wait, did somebody number these wrong? Nope, different traditions. Welcome to tarot. But symbolically, both belong beautifully in this next part of the journey. Strength isn't just physical strength. It's courage, patience, self-regulation, learning how to work with the wild parts of ourselves instead of simply trying to overpower them. Then comes the Hermit. I love the Hermit. The Hermit steps away, not necessarily because something is wrong, but sometimes we need distance from everyone else's voices so we can hear our own. And the Hermit asks, what do I know when nobody else is telling me what to think? And then, just when you think you've figured it all out, here comes the Wheel of Fortune. Things change because that's what life does. Cycles turn, circumstances shift, and something we thought was stable isn't. And something unexpected arrives. And suddenly we're reminded that control has limits. Then justice asks us to look at consequences. Responsibility, truth, balance. Our choices matter. What we do affects what happens next. And when we reach one of the cards I think is most understood, the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man isn't necessarily stuck. Sometimes he's choosing to stop, to surrender, and to look at something differently. Which is incredibly frustrating when what you really want is an answer that says, do this. And tarot responds with, have you considered doing absolutely nothing for a minute? Excuse me. Like, I'm a mom and I have a little backyard flock of chickens and a handful of dogs. Like, do nothing. But sometimes the only way forward is to stop forcing forward movement. And then we reach 13, the death card. Death isn't coming to get you. We need to spend a minute here because if you've ever watched tarot appear in a movie, you know exactly what happens. Someone flips over the death card and everyone gasps. Someone is definitely dying before the credits roll. But in tarot, death is a little different. And it much more often represents endings, transformation, transition, and release. The ending of something that cannot continue in the same form. And endings can hurt. I don't like interpretations that turn every difficult tarot card into everything is wonderful. Sometimes transformation is painful, and sometimes letting go is awful. And sometimes we need to know that a chapter needs to end, even though we desperately wish it didn't. But death also reminds us that endings are part of life. We cannot keep every version of ourselves forever. We outgrow things. Relationships change. Careers change. Beliefs change. Homes change. Dreams change. We change. And after death comes temperance. Integration, balance, learning how to combine what remains. The placement in the journey is beautiful to me. Something ends and we ask, what do I make from what comes next? Chapter 3, the shadowy part. And now we enter the cards people tend to get nervous about. The Devil, the Tower, and the Moon. Some of tarot's greatest hits if you're trying to frighten someone in a movie. But again, these are human experiences. The Devil can ask us to examine attachment, temptation, patterns, and things that have power over us. The things we've convinced ourselves we cannot change. It asks, where am I giving away my power? Then comes the Tower. Disruption, revelation, structures collapsing. The moment when something we believed was stable suddenly isn't. And I'm not going to pretend the Tower is always comfortable. It's not. It also does not hold power over you. Sometimes life really does pull the rug out from underneath us, but the Tower can also represent that collapse of something that wasn't sustainable. A truth we couldn't avoid anymore. A structure built on a foundation that couldn't hold. And when the dust settles, we get the Star. Hope, healing, renewal, a quiet return to possibility. And I love that the Star comes after the Tower. Not because everything instantly becomes perfect after something falls apart, but because eventually we're starting looking up again. And then comes the Moon. Uncertainty, illusion, fear, the subconscious, moving through something when we can't see the entire path. And finally, the Sun. Clarity, vitality, joy, illumination. Something becomes visible. Something makes sense. But we're not done here. Chapter 4. Becoming again. After the Sun comes Judgment, and Judgment isn't necessarily about someone else deciding whether you've been good or bad. It's awakening, reflection, calling, looking at the journey you've taken and asking, what do I understand now that I couldn't understand before? And then we reach the world. Completion, integration, wholeness. A cycle closes. We've done it. The Fool has traveled through the entire Major Arcana. We should celebrate. Roll credits. We're finished. Except what comes after 21? 0. The Fool. Again, because that's life. We finish something, we become someone new, and eventually we find ourselves standing at another edge thinking, well, I have absolutely no idea what's happening next. And we step forward anyway. This is why I don't think the Major Arcana is really about predicting major events. To me, these cards are archetypes of human experience. We all know the Fool. We've all started something without knowing where it would lead. We've been the Hermit. We've had tower moments. We've had things end. We've wrestled with attachments. We've hoped. We've doubted. We've made choices, and we've started again. You don't move through those experiences once. You can be experiencing the Chariot in your career, the Hermit in your spiritual practice, death in a relationship, and the Fool in some completely new creative project all at the same time, because humans are inconveniently complicated. That's why I don't think you need to memorize the Major Arcana as 22 isolated definitions. Learn the story. The meanings start becoming much easier to understand. For this week's field notes, I want you to find your Major Arcana cards. If you have a tarot deck, pull those 22 cards out. And don't shuffle them. Put them in order. Start with the Fool, then slowly move through them until you reach the world. Look at the artwork. You don't need to read the guidebook yet. Just ask, what seems to be changing? Which cards feel light? Which feel heavy? And where does the imagery become uncomfortable? Where does it become hopeful again? Then choose one card by asking, which Major Arcana card feels more like the chapter of life I'm in right now? Not which card you want. Which one feels familiar? Maybe you're the Fool. Maybe you're beginning again. Maybe you're the Hermit and you need some space. Maybe you're in a death chapter and something is ending. Maybe you've been living through the Tower. Maybe you're finally reaching the star. Or maybe you're standing in the world, realizing something has actually come full circle. Write down the card and then ask, what is this archetype asking me to learn? And what card comes next? Because that second question can be really interesting. Not as a prediction, as a reflection. If I'm currently experiencing this, what might moving forward look like? Oh, and one more thing before you go. I want to leave you with something that I think changes the way you read difficult tarot cards. The Major Arcana contains uncomfortable cards because being human contains uncomfortable experiences. A tarot deck where every card promised happiness, abundance, soulmates, and money would be, well, pretty useless because that's not life. We grieve. We make mistakes, we become attached to things that aren't good for us, we get lost, things fall apart, we question ourselves, we change. But the Major Arcana doesn't end at the Death card. It doesn't end at the Devil or even at the Tower. The journey keeps going. After the Tower, there's the Star. After the Moon, there's the Sun. And after the world, there is another Fool standing at the beginning of another journey. That's what I think makes these cards beautiful. They're not telling us something bad is coming. They're reminding us, you've been human before and you'll keep becoming. Until next time, if you're learning tarot right now, here's my biggest recommendation for the Major Arcana. Don't try to memorize 22 paragraphs. Learn the journey. Learn the personalities of the card, and notice how they relate to experiences you've actually had. Let your understanding grow every time you encounter them. If you would like some structure while you're doing that, my 30-day tarot challenge gives you prompts and exercises designed to help you spend time with your cards and build your own relationship with them. You'll also find more tarot guides and deeper dives over in the field guide. And you can join us in the Wildflowers Moonlight Discord. If you want somewhere to talk tarot, share your pulls, ask questions, or simply lurk while you learn. And I have a question for you this week. Which Major Arcana card feels most like you right now? Not your favorite card, not the prettiest one in your deck. The one that feels like the chapter you're actually living. Sit with that one. See what it has to say. And remember, whatever card you're in right now, the journey doesn't stop there. Until next time, stay curious, wander gently, and I'll meet you back here beneath the moonlight.